Welcome to A Ride on the Outside. MMA is full of people on the inside, but what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
Welcome to episode 58 of the MMA Outsiders. That's Zain Bando. I'm Tom Albano, as always. And Zain, UFC 294. It was, how do I say it? It was a card. It was a UFC event. It happened.
Yeah, it happened, but it happened in such a way where I don't think looking back on it, we'd say we were expecting 70 to 75% of it. I think a lot of people left that event either on TV or in person scratching their heads. And it's pretty wild considering that the day that this is airing is October 24th, and there's a very special meaning in the MMA calendar to this date because on this day in 2009, we had one of the most controversial decisions in the light heavyweight championship history with Lyoto Machida versus Shogun Rua.
Shogun Rua, yeah.
And UFC 104 left a very somber taste in everyone's mouth, and now almost like 15 or 16 years later, we kind of get a similar vibe with UFC 294, although UFC 294 is on a much bigger scale. Before we get into all of that and more, make sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to follow the Empty the Bench Podcast Network all across social media at MMA Outsiders ETV. Then, of course, you can follow the Empty the Bench Podcast Network at ETV Network, and be sure to take the MMA Outsiders on the road with you wherever you get your podcast. And then, of course, for those of you watching the video feed of this, be sure to subscribe to the Empty the Bench Podcast Network for our show and so much more. My name is Zain Bando. I'm a staff writer for BJPenn.com, and MMA Knockout is part of the Fan Nation umbrella. To my left is Tom Albano. You can find his work over at Fansided MMA. You can follow him at Thomas J. Albano. You can follow me at ZainBando99 for all my content and more. And of course, even though I don't know how much longer it is going to last, I am a part of the Bellator rankings panel along with 20 plus other media members. So that's what we have going on our side of things in terms of MMA work.
You almost forgot, Zain. You almost forgot. And then I do work for the PFL for their championship cards coming up and stuff. So we're coming after you guys.
Yeah, that's true. As I said, I think a month ago, we might end up being co-workers at some point.
Again.
Instead of being rival competitors to two different promotions that are butting heads, which we still don't know what's going on with that whole thing.
Yeah, so let's do a little rundown, a Nick Morrison-esque rundown of everything we're going to talk about here before we get into everything. We'll start with our recap of UFC 294 and just, as you kind of put it, Zain, the bizarreness of that card. Zain, neither one of us were doctors, but I think we could have done probably a better job than the physician that was there in Abu Dhabi. Zain, I don't know. Is our show in the desert?
No, Tom. Officially, our show is taking place in two different parts of the United States of America. You are in the suburbs of New York, if you will, and I am in the suburbs of Chicago. So no.
Okay, the desert. That good enough. So Johnny Walker should have been able to keep going. And
yeah, absolutely.
Zain, the doctor for that card. It reminds me, have you ever seen the news story of the teenager who managed to get away with for a while of posing as a doctor and diagnosing patients?
Oh yeah, I remember that.
That's like who I think the doctor was at the 294 card. We'll get into that though. We'll get into more of the doctor funny business. We'll also talk about some business. So last week we talked about how Showtime boxing was coming to an end, and of course the fate of Bellator still be uncertain. Well, Zain, it's not just boxing. It's Showtime Sports. Everything. Boxing, MMA, inside the NFL, all gone. Everything is done at the end of the year.
It's pretty wild. Well, I can't say I'm incredibly sad just because I didn't grow up in the heyday of Showtime Sports, so I don't know what that's fully like, but I can say that Showtime has had a major impact on my MMA life because that's how I got introduced to what Strikeforce was, because that's where all of the events were. And then, of course, that's how I started to get more interested in Bellator after they moved off of MTV over a decade ago. So definitely, Showtime has been an element in those two things. And then, of course, me being kind of a late bloomer boxing fan, all of the major boxing matches the last several years have been on Showtime. So to not see their sports category anymore past this year is incredibly disappointing. And truly, and I think I've alluded to this several times on the show, I do really, really wish the employees that work there, whether it's full-time or independent contractors, the best of luck, because as much as people like to crap on the production being what it is sometimes, it really is one of the cleanest broadcasts from a combat sports perspective that you can get. So overall, it's a very, very, interesting time, but I think it's the world we live in now. I think everything is, going digital and going streaming, and, you're seeing DAZN and ESPN be the biggest players in combat sports, and they want the rights to everything now. So I think that's where it's going. And I think someone said it best. It might have been someone on Bad Left Hook or another boxing outlet. They ended one of their columns very well, and whoever the writer was, I'm blanking in who it is, but they said it best, like it's simply an end of an era, and Showtime, closing its doors on the sports category is that specifically for combat sports.
Well said. So other stories we're going to talk about: Bellator finally cutting Dillon Danis, maybe a little too late. Jake Paul, we got some news about him. Logan Paul versus Dillon Danis. Speaking of their fight, obviously we talked about the Happy Punch report last week. Dave Meltzer now, of course, formerly, or is he still at MMA fighting? I'm not even sure.
I don't think he is. I think he's Mr. Independent now. I think he just does Wrestling Observer.
The Wrestling Observer newsletter. Yeah. But he is disputing now that report officially. And then, Zain, we had one event in the desert last week. We've got another coming up. We're moving from Abu Dhabi to Saudi Arabia. We got Tyson Fury Francis Ngannou's big little showdown to talk about at the end of the episode. But right now, let us talk about UFC 294. Zain, the biggest highlight of which came in the main event, which, by the way, the total amount of fight time in the cage for the pay-per-view main card lasted less than 25 minutes, less than a full 5-round championship fight.
Yeah, that's pretty wild considering how long the UFC's been around, that you just get those rare footnotes in MMA history, and that number of 25 is definitely a footnote that, now that you mentioned it, it's probably going to be ingrained in my head whenever you ask me years from now about UFC 294. I think that's the only number that's going to pop into my head, because that's just mind-boggling.
And it all capped off with Islam Makhachev. Zain, I'm sorry, but I mean, Islam Makhachev, we knew was good. And we knew about the late notice status of this fight. But a head kick knockout within a span of about 3 minutes. Who thought that that's how it was going to end? Because I didn't.
I don't think anyone in the world did. Even the newest of MMA fans probably didn't think that Islam Makhachev could do that to Volkanovski. I literally did not know until after the fight that was the first time in 10 years that Volk had been knocked out.
First time he's been finished in the UFC. Only the second time in his career he's been knocked out. You'd have to go back to his regional days, which, Zain, it also ended with a head kick knockout. So, but we've seen some of the best fighters in the world take on Volkanovski, whether it be Yair Rodriguez, whether it be Max Holloway. He fought Jose Aldo. We have seen some of the best be in there with Volk. No one has ever done. Makhachev is just on another level, I think. Now, did the late notice status of this fight impact it a little bit? Yeah, I think so. And I still question the UFC and Alec Volkanovski's decision in taking this fight. Now, obviously, Volkanovski has come out and has stated that in a very emotional kind of response that he needed to take this fight and he needed to, be in camp and needed to, have this chance at Islam again. But it goes just what I said last week, even if not on Alex's sake, for the sake of his mental health and well-being. But if you're the UFC, and you got Gamrot waiting in the wings on a potential injury with Charles Oliveira, a champ versus champ fight, that's something you build to. You should have plenty of time to build to. The fact that it was a 12-day or so turnaround, I don't know if that was smart marketing by the promotion. And ultimately, we'll talk about it with Chimaev and Usman too. Ultimately, I think the late notice stuff, it looked like a better card on paper, but it didn't play out that way.
No, it certainly didn't. I think the biggest issue that I take from it is just that, sometimes when you take these short notice fights, you don't know where they're going to go, and sometimes there are flashes in the pan and you get new champions, like when Michael Bisping knocked out Luke Rockhold.
Sean Strickland last month.
Right, when Sean Strickland beat Adesanya, where sometimes you get those flashes in the pan, but it's like, when you got to go to Abu Dhabi, a place that, there's a clear home field advantage for Makhachev. He had just fought there almost a year to the day to beat Oliveira, literally in the same building. Like that's not an easy thing to do. And I might have been, a little delusional when I picked Volk. I just thought, the way Volk was hyping himself up and the way he was conducting himself with members of the media, I'm like, I don't see with his level of confidence how he can lose this fight. I was obviously really wrong about that, but I think that the big issue is with these fights not playing out that way is, I think no matter who Islam was standing across from, whoever he was standing across from, what he showed on Saturday night showed that no matter if it was Justin Gaethje, no matter if it was Gamrot, no matter if it was Fiziev, no matter if it was Dustin Poirier, the other guy across from Islam wouldn't have had a chance. And it's simply the fact that Islam is the best lightweight in the world right now. Some may say he's the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world. And I just think when you have someone on a different level and you have someone that's been so dominant ever since his UFC debut pretty much, I could not, now looking back, I could not foresee a scenario where it could have gone any differently. And I just think it was the cards the UFC was dealt. They had to do what they had to do to save the co-main and main event, quite frankly, the event itself. And, that's what happened. And, now they kind of have to sit back and say, okay, maybe we need to plan a little bit better just in the future, have a backup to the backup to the backup, just in case anything like this happens again. Because if anyone was expecting a 5-round war again, that's not what they got. And unfortunately, we'll probably never see a trilogy again with how decisive fight number 2 was.
Yeah, absolutely not. I think as they were talking on the UFC broadcast, I think it was Meltzer and Bisping, maybe down the line after a few more fights, and then if somehow anyone is able to dethrone Islam, maybe Volk can get another shot at 155. But right now, and even he has admitted, what's best for him at this point is to just stick to featherweight, stick to defending his 145-pound title. But yeah, I kind of agree. What this performance showed was, and I said it to somebody earlier at my work that, we have seen Makhachev with his striking before, and we know that it's pretty damn good. But obviously, we still associate him, Zain, with the Dagestani style of wrestling, with his grappling game. But, his striking was still always there. But to the level of what happened, it wasn't a 5-round war, but the head kick knockout of another champion in the way that he did, this performance, this main event was more about, as you kind of said, Islam Makhachev putting his stamp on there. He is one of, if not the best, lightweights and pound-for-pound fighters in the world of mixed martial arts today. Now, where he goes from here, I kind of agree with Dana in the post-fight press conference. Obviously Gaethje won the BMF, and that fight is so tempting. But Charles Oliveira, it's not like, come on, it's not like he was out of a fight. He got a cut over his eyebrow, in less than 2 weeks' notice, and it was a really bad cut, and he wouldn't be cleared. And, Charles Oliveira, we said that when he beat Beneil Dariush, he earned his shot. I think you got to give him the rematch still.
Oh, for sure. Even with the slight weight miss, it's whether you want to call it a weight miss or Arizona, gap, whatever you want to call it.
But now I get it. But now here's my question, Sam, because we like to play matchmaker a lot on the show. Where I should say UFC schedule maker on the show a lot.
More so me though. I like that. Yeah.
So obviously they're not going to be going to the Middle East again. They will, and we'll talk about it, but it's going to be fight night events. Obviously they're not going to go back to the region for a pay-per-view again until next October for the next Abu Dhabi card.
Right.
But
and for the next 4 Abu Dhabi October cards too. So
correct. But Zan, does this not, considering if Oliveira, his time recovery and the fact that Islam got such a quick finish, does this open the door that kind of like what happened this past year, where maybe that Super Bowl weekend card, if they're really saving Conor for it, and then we don't know what's going on with O'Malley, or heaven forbid, something happens with Volk to Topuria that they can't get it for the January card, could you throw Islam versus Oliveira 2 on that January or February card?
No, I think it's too early. I think you build that fight a slow build and you do it at UFC 300. That's what I think. I think
you would have them co-main Conor and Chandler? Yeah,
I would.
Oh man, the fireworks that would be there with Islam and Conor in the same building.
Yeah. I could easily see the UFC doing that though.
And then I guess, if the Conor Chandler crap falls out again, I guess then Islam Oliveira 2 is a suitable main event replacement.
Right. And that is under the assumption Conor versus Chandler does not take place. Yes.
And then I guess based on our talks, then would you put then O'Malley for Super Bowl weekend to try and continue to build him?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right, I like the plan that we're going here.
Hang on, you want to talk about a banger beginning of the year? This is what I think. So they're gonna do in January 297. They'll do Volk and Topuria.
Okay, that was going to answer my next question. You think Volk still fights in January against Topuria?
So Volk is still going to fight at 297. At 298 Super Bowl weekend in the main event, it's O'Malley versus Cheeto Vera. At 299, it's whatever the heck the UFC heavyweight title fight's going to be. And then at UFC 300, it's Conor versus Chandler and or Islam versus Charles Oliveira 2.
I like that.
And then one other title fight, because I think 300 is going to be 3 title fights.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
There's going to be a third title fight, which probably means that the vacant women's bantamweight title fight is going to be on 300.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. Here's my question though: considering what Volk has gone through, considering this first round, knockout loss, I am for you that if he is healthy enough, he could defend against Topuria. Which
is what he wants to do. He did very clear that he wants to fight in January. He wants the quick turnaround, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, and Ilia Topuria, we talked about on the show weeks ago. He told a television station that seems to be the plan. That the verbal agreement, even before the fill-in for this, that he and Volk would go at it in January. But after this loss, Sam, and the comments that he made post-fight, do you think that Dana and the UFC are on the phone with Max Holloway of, if something falls through, can you fight Ilya in Toronto for an interim title?
Oh, I think those talks have already started. That would be my assumption. Yeah.
I guess and then of course. Oh, my point was going to be that you would just put Max in as a backup fighter anyway, even if Volk gets cleared. Still have him weigh in.
Yeah, so I have a question kind of to counter that, though. What happens if Topuria gets hurt?
Unfortunately, Zain, that might be one where one of two things are going to happen. Number one,
Okay.
the UFC is going to have to get another title fight for January in case that one falls through. Or number two...
Are you saying one that's already going to be confirmed, or one that they just kind of make as they go?
That either or, that they make as they go, or you got to get a co-headline, another title fight to co-headline the January card. Or, unfortunately, we say unfortunately for the UFC's sake, but my feelings with Max, they might have to bite the bullet again. They might have to bite a bullet.
Or do they quickly turn around and they make the light heavyweight title fight as one of the other January cards, assuming that no one is injured post 295?
You can't. Oh, I was gonna say. First of all, I was gonna say you can't take that away from the Garden card, but quite possibly, the winner of Pereira versus Yuri to defend against
probably Jamal Hill or Ankalaev.
Is Jamal Hill going to be ready? Well, that's the thing. And we'll talk about the Ankalaev Walker fight. If you can rebook that Ankalaev Walker fight, then maybe make that a contenders fight just in case. Let whoever wins in the Garden, if Volk isn't good or Topuria aren't good to go for January, maybe put that one on there too.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different possibilities, but do you agree with me when I say that 299 is going to be some sort of heavyweight title fight?
I think so. I think it just depends upon what happens in a couple of weeks. Is Jones going to retire? Is Stipe going to retire? Are they both going to retire?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Although, if you did watch the trailer, John Jones said his next chapter is going to be about who he really thinks he could be and what stamp he could put on his career. So maybe that means if he wins, he doesn't retire. So
we'll see. All right, let's talk about, because we mentioned Ankalaev and Walker, but I want to talk about the co-main event first. Khamzat Chimaev, Kamaru Usman. Again, another fight that, and I want to be clear, I actually thought that this was a fun fight. It just, I don't know if it was the fight that I was expecting. So no, to start things off.
No, it certainly wasn't. I concur with you on that.
Okay, start things off. Did you score round 1 10-8 for Chimaev?
No, I scored a 10-9.
You scored a 10-9. Okay. And did you score round 2 for Kamaru?
Yeah, I did.
And you scored round 3 for Chimaev. You had a 29-28?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, first of all, that leads me to first of all, what judge is in their right mind to give Kamaru Usman round 3? He definitely had his moments in there, but when Chimaev got the takedown, that was it in my book.
Yeah, that's why I scored round 3 for Chimaev, was because he had more top control time. That seemed easy enough. Yeah.
And then the 10-8, I can honestly see either way. I guess it depends upon what your definition of a 10-8 is, even though everything is objective and subjective at the same time. But I guess I was, on that note, kind of surprised at the dominance that Chimaev had in that first round against Usman when it came to grappling. And I don't know if it was the fact that Usman, was at a new weight class on such short notice, or was taking on a short notice opponent in Chimaev, who was pretty tough. But, Usman definitely got back into the game in the second round, but something about that first round just didn't look right.
No, something about that first round didn't look right either. And I think it's one of those things where nerves just got to both of them. That's why the first round didn't go as, how the fans maybe would have hoped it would have. And that's what's going to happen when you have two short notice main and co-main events. They're not going to go exactly as expected, and that's kind of what happened in round 1 of the co-main event. Yeah.
So, I mean, did Chimaev at least impress you enough to earn a shot at Strickland?
Oh, 1,000%, yeah. Yeah, I mean, you do that to Kamaru Usman for 15 minutes, the former welterweight champion of the world, the guy that everybody thought was going to literally retire on a winning streak, yeah, you can't deny him now. As much as if you're a DDP fan, you're throwing stuff at the wall at the moment. I.e., you're probably still upset, wondering what's up with DDP.
Correct. But you know what? In all fairness, Zan, if Usman had blasted Chimaev if Usman had blasted Chimaev like he did Colby Covington in the 5th round of their first fight, we would have been saying that Usman needed to fight Strickland ASAP.
Yeah, for sure.
So for DDP fans, there was no way out.
Which, by the way, speaking of 5 rounds, Dana White did say that if that fight was 5 rounds, he would have been very interested to see what would have happened in 4 and 5.
Okay, so we don't like bringing his name up on much in terms of ideas, but did you see Connor Sweefen over the weekend, right? He thinks that the UFC should mandate that title eliminators like Whitaker, DDP, like Chimaev, Usman should be 5 rounds.
I think it's 1,000% great idea.
I'm for that too.
It should have been implemented 2 years ago, in my opinion.
I'm completely for that too. I think we need a couple of big stake fights like that, even if they're just a co-main of a pay-per-view to a title fight. I think you could still 5 round it.
Yeah, I mean, even though it makes the pay-per-view 4.5 hours long instead of 3.5 hours. I don't know if that impacts ESPN in any way, but yeah, I think it's a smart idea.
But Sam, but we can't forget we need all our trailers and all our plugs for the likes of Five Nights at Freddy's and stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, as a DDP fan, yeah, maybe kind of throwing some stuff at the wall. But what's interesting is Chimaev did apparently break his thumb during the fight, according to him.
Yeah, so that could keep him out for a little bit. But Dana's hoping that he isn't injured too much to where they can make the fight as soon as possible, which leads me to believe that could be Super Bowl weekend too. You could have that fight, and you could have O'Malley and Cheeto Vera on the same card. But then again, though, you already know the UFC is kind of pre-planning, because I think, and now I don't know this to be certain, but I really think Dana wants Hamzat in the United States.
I think so.
For one of his next fights. So you either do him on 298 or you do him on 300. But then again, what do you do? What do you do a year from now if he's not healthy? I could not be the first one to tell you who their main event would be.
Yeah, and especially without Adesanya out of the picture, who's supposedly saying that he's not going to be fighting for a while.
Yeah. Which do you think realistically though, that when Adesanya does come back, he'll want a big stakes rematch. He'll want Pereira, or he'll want someone that he wants to get. Again, he'll want the Strickland fight.
I can see it, but here's the other thing. I can also see he's saying he's not going to fight. But let's imagine a disaster scenario occurs, like what happened with 294, or what happened last year at 279 in September with the whole Nate Diaz and Hamzat Chimaev, Tony Ferguson, kerfuffle.
Right, and the whole thing with Kevin Holland being switched up to fight Hamzat.
Right. My point is, in a kerfuffle like that, if Dana was in a bind and he had no other choice, and he went to Israel and said, here, have this money, 3 times your pay, million, whatever, I think Adesanya would take the money to go back in there.
Oh, 1,000%. Yeah.
Just to get Dana out of that bind.
Oh, I think so too, and I don't even think it matters if he wins or loses, as long as he gets paid. I think that's all he'll end up caring about. And this is no disrespect to Adesanya's legacy; he's had a wonderful career, but you can tell because of how active he's been, he wants to slow it down, which makes a ton of sense. I mean, he averages 2 to 3 fights a year for the last 3.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he probably needs a little bit of a break.
Oh, he does. But I said it. Cormier said it. He's 4-3 in his last 7. He needs to slow down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Zain. For our next fight here, I'm gonna take a quote from Colin Mockery from Whose Line Is It Anyway? One of his hoedowns. I am a doctor. Yes, I'm really bad. Boy, that makes my patients really, really mad, because I mean, Zain, what was that doctor? What was he? Where did they find this guy? Did they find this guy on some street in Abu Dhabi?
I don't know, but I've watched the UFC for a long time. You know this, I know this. That's the most inexperienced referee / doctor mistake I've ever seen in a fight.
But what are you sure compared to what happened on the prelims when one of the fighters got hit with I think it was Henry who got hit with the low blow, and basically the doctor said, he didn't kick your balls and basically grow up. And Henry's response was, it was all D word and balls. Only in the UFC can we have that kind of conversation. And it's just normal.
Fortunately or unfortunately, however you look at it, yes, that is correct. But and I will say this is a worse mistake considering the stakes of this fight compared to the one on the undercard. And no disrespect to Victor Henry and his opponent, but this one was a little bit more. This one was a little bit more mistakes.
For sure. Now, and we can't, we got some of the footage here, but here's what I'm going to say. If what the commentators, John Anik and crew, were talking about is true, where Johnny Walker at one point in that conversation asked what round it is, he's given, as much as we like to make fun of the doctor, Walker would have given him an out then. You can't ask that. You can't ask that in the middle of a fight what round it is.
No, you can't. Now, I don't mean to turn this around a little bit, but how ironic is it that Johnny Walker is involved in a fight like this, and his video of him being knocked out 5 times on the regional scene resurfaces the day before?
Yeah. Unfortunately for poor Walker. Now, I'll turn this around again. If it was a matter of, Walker said in the desert and that wasn't good enough for the doctor, then as much as Dana and people laughed at it, then Dana would be right that there was some sort of language barrier. Because according to, I forget, one of the commentators said it, it may have been Felder, that the answer, if he had answered Abu Dhabi, he would have been technically wrong. That what country are you in?
Cormier and Felder said it.
They both said that you have to say isn't it like the United Arab Emirates?
Yeah.
So I don't know. As a doctor, I'd like you kind of going off, Zain, but you gotta. I don't know where they got this doctor, but he was not the most experienced, and it kind of it showed. And honestly, it damaged the card.
Yeah, it did. It damaged the card. It damaged that fight that was just getting going, and it damaged.
How about the reports of 2 or 3 staph infection fighters?
Yeah, that's weird. And if that's true, I don't know how that gets approved by any commission in the world, let alone.
How are they hiding that?
I don't. Oh, do you think it's weird the UFC barely said anything about it too?
Yeah, no doubt. So there's that, and a lot, like I said before, I hope this fight gets rebooked. And I agree with what you mentioned in the text message, by the way, on Saturday. You could tell that Ankalaev and Dana just don't have a like for one another.
Yeah, how is it that I'm the only one that noticed that Dana didn't even acknowledge Ankalaev once when he was in the cage?
I think there's still better tensions over December.
Oh, I think December. I think so too.
And I said it to you in the text message. I'll say it here: the minute, whether it be by sunset or whether it be by fights running out, the minute Ankalaev's contract runs out, he's jumping ship to PFL.
You think he will?
I think he will.
Do you think he will? And if he does, do you think he can win the light heavyweight tournament?
It's just also a matter of, I think Dana is going to keep him as far away from that title belt as possible.
I think so too. And even if he had won last year, I still think there would have been tension. just because.
Almost like a Woodley kind of like tension with how that fight with Jan Blachowicz played out.
Yeah, it's interesting how no one pushed Dana about his disdain, or I don't know what you want to call it. It's his lack of attention towards Ankalaev. It's very interesting.
For
But
sure.
yeah, definitely a bizarre fight, and a fight where goes to show the last year the light heavyweight division has been cursed. So
yeah, cursed in a really bad way. Just to wrap up, by the way, we're talking about 294. Couple of first round finishes that started off the card. Ikram Aliskerov finishing the veteran Warley Alves, and Dana says that Ikram's next opponent has to be a ranked fighter.
oh yeah, he's not wrong about that, and you do, and this is no disrespect to Alves. He's been around the game a long time, but this is what you do in a fight where you're expecting to win. You go out and you dominate. That's exactly what Aliskerov did, and without a doubt, if you were to bet on one fight on the whole card as a for sure winner, this was probably the fight.
Yeah, definitely. And then earlier, to open up the pay-per-view main card, Said Nurmagomedov, like less than 75 seconds. It was probably like 72 or 73. He gets a quick submission win over Muin Gafurov.
Yeah, this was very impressive, and just what's crazy is the Nurmagomedov name. I saw a statistic out there. The Nurmagomedov name with that last name is 63-0 combined as a name, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it. So,
but then I also remember in 2019, Khabib's cousin ended up losing, but his last name may not have been Nurmagomedov.
Yeah, I think it was under a different name. Yeah.
You know the one I'm talking about, November 9th in Moscow in 2019.
Yeah, I do know who you're talking about. Yeah. And by the way, MMA on Point posted the graphic, which is why I'm even referencing it. It might have just been like either the Nurmagomedov last name or the combination of Makachev, Nurmagomedov, and the other Nurmagomedov.
Oh no, it definitely is the latter, because this person's last name is Nurmagomedov. It was Abubakar. Abubakar got submitted by David Zawada in Moscow.
Oh, that's right. And isn't David Zawada not even in the UFC anymore?
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
It was like one of the biggest upsets of the year. I'm watching that in like Atlantic City. I'm like, what in God's name just happened? Nurmagomedov got submitted.
That's pretty crazy. But yeah, he looked very impressive. And then Tom, our picks, at least my picks, were pretty good. I think according to Tapology, I got 9 out of 13. How did you do?
I probably was around the same mark. I definitely had to have been around the same mark.
Easy. I started off on a real hot streak, like real hot. Like I was really impressed. Yeah.
As I'm looking, by the way, so okay, let's see. So Magomedov, Dudakova, Wood. I had Chubli, which I'm kicking myself for not picking Breeden.
Who I had, by the way, in case you forgot, I had Breeden.
Yeah, I know you did. 4, 5. Yeah, honestly, I finished with 9 or 10. I finished with 9 or 10 wins as well. So that was it was a pretty decent in terms of our pick results.
Yeah,
but then in terms of a grade for this, so I ran our poll and bit of a mixed bag, honestly. Some loved it, some hated it. That's why this was just a really bizarre kind of card.
I'd give it a B-, but the promotion with 11 days to go to this card is like nothing I've ever seen. Like,
yeah,
I don't know about you, but it felt like UFC 294 was all over a social media with 10 days to go. That's all anybody was talking about.
But I think that also does some damage to the card, right? You go B- or C+ or C, because this card, Zain, even with 12 days ago, we get the short notice, but this did not live up to the hype.
No, it didn't. It not. Hopefully, UFC 295 in a couple of weeks will, though, and hopefully the end of the year does as well. But yeah,
we got two.
Definitely very interesting scenes in Abu Dhabi. And by the way, that crowd looked completely sold out to the rafters, which was very, very cool to see. It seems that the people who went to that event had an absolute blast.
Yeah. Two UFC pay-per-views to go in 2023, and Zain, I think you and I will agreement so far that nothing has topped the July combo of 290, 291.
No, not even close. But with how good 295 and 296 are, I think it has a chance
for sure
to at least compete with it.
For sure. Speaking of, you talked about the great crowd they had in Abu Dhabi. So the UFC, as part of an agreement, is expanding its agreement within the Middle East. And the next UFC card out in the Middle East, and for the first time, we're going to have a fight night card in Saudi Arabia to take place in Riyadh in March of 2024.
Yeah, and guess what, Tom? It's going to be at the same venue as Ngannou versus Fury in front of 40,000 people.
So, Zain, I talked about this in terms of the big four sports when it came to on ETB Sports, and I dipped combat sports into there too, but the Middle East is just, especially places like Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi, they're going to be hubs in terms of combat sports, let alone sports in general sports, let alone combat sports in general for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, this is the international version of Las Vegas.
It's starting to seem that way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's that. I think the UFC 294 could have been better. I so far want to say, I forget all our different rankings, but I would put it smack in the middle with how weird the card was, or maybe even like down towards the bottom with, considering the fact that, we started off the UFC calendar years in terms of pay-per-views with some bangers. Then May, June came, we had a couple of slow ones, and then July, as we said, 290, 291, two of the greatest pay-per-views that the UFC has ever produced. So
yeah, I would say going into UFC 295, UFC 292 is my number one card of 2023.
292 was, kind of as well. The UFC had just a banger summer.
Yeah, it was a really good summer with a lot of solid fights and a lot of different territories that you wouldn't expect them to hit in a regular year, let alone a year post-COVID. So it'll be interesting to see what they do next summer. It feels like I know this is kind of a bad reference, but it makes sense. It's almost like the UFC's version of March Madness, or their postseason, if you will, is every single summer. It just feels like the summers have somewhat of a playoff feel to it, and in November and December is when you get into the MMA version of the Super Bowl a little bit too. So it's definitely an interesting time for the promotion, and it's clear that they love stacking their cards, and it's clear they've gone to this title fight only model over the last 6 years that it definitely helps drive all the different intricacies of promotion and all that. So you have to give kudos to the UFC on that front there as well. And of course, as we both alluded to, 295 and 296, assuming these stay together, should be excellent. And not to mention the fact that the day after this airs, or actually no, the day that this is going to air, the UFC is going to have various announcements. So it'll be interesting to see if Conor versus Chandler or any of those other fights we were alluding to is going to be a part of that special announcement that Dana White teased Saturday after the event. Yeah,
obviously we're recording this prior to any sort of announcement coming out from Dana, but we're in our usual spot. So, and this week's already hectic enough for me. So we'll discuss Dana's announcement whenever it gets released on next week's episode. Who knows if he even makes an announcement? He meant to tell the media something on Saturday. He's like, oh, I just completely forgot.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I didn't know what he was referring to because I did not watch the scrum from the night before. So,
yeah. All right, Sam, we got about 15, 20 minutes. Let's get to our news pretty quickly before we preview Fury and Ngannou. Little update to Showtime, as I referenced during the intro. It is not just the end of Showtime Boxing. It is not just the end of Bellator MMA on Showtime. It is the end of Showtime Sports itself, the Showtime Sports brand, which housed boxing for years, Bellator MMA the last couple of years, housed inside the NFL, documentaries, all the different, fight hype stuff leading up to some major boxing events.
So all
No
access,
more.
Which was
all access. That's what I was referring to. Yeah.
Yep.
Gone. No more. Everything is done.
Yeah, it certainly is a very era-changing time in combat sports with Showtime leaving the picture. That kind of ends the HBO Showtime era of the sport of boxing, where everything just felt bigger on premium television. And, it just kind of feels weird that Bellator 301, which is taking place in my hometown, is going to be the last Bellator event to air on the network. So that'll be a very somber night. I'm already kind of mentally preparing myself that there might be some tears in the various media spaces that week and the night of the event. But nonetheless, as we kind of alluded to earlier and off the air, Showtime for me personally was a huge aspect of my combat sports fandom. I'm a late boxing fan, and most of the major boxing matches that I've seen have taken place on that network, as well as me getting more interested in what Bellator has been producing. Showtime was a major reason for it, and honestly, those were some of the main reasons I would even watch Showtime, was for their combat sports coverage. So it'll feel weird to see that it's no longer going to exist, but I will say it's given fans, media members, what have you, spectacles and events that they'll never forget because they saw it on the network. I guess I'm going to ask you, Tom. You've been around longer than I have on this planet per se. What would you say was your first memory watching Showtime, or what's one of the first things you remember about Showtime?
I mean, I had, when I was little, because I was kind of like you, where I knew of boxing, but I wasn't a fan until, after I'd gotten into the UFC and such. So I had always known Showtime to be like HBO, combined them with the Cinemax and the Stars, the big premium movie channels. But Zain, I did know that Showtime was a boxing channel too, because, the first things I think of are going back to when I was little, the likes of Mike Tyson and some of these other boxing greats, when their fights, like Tyson Holyfield, airing on Showtime, and hearing the legendary call of Jimmy Lennon Jr., "It's Showtime!" Like, it was just Showtime and boxing just gelled together so much ever since Showtime came on the boxing scene to be a true competitor to HBO. And Zain, it feels very weird. 5 years ago, we were discussing how pivotal it was and how game-changing it was that HBO was no longer going to be in the boxing business. And now here we are at neither HBO or Showtime. The legendary premium channels there you would watch boxing, late 80s, 90s, 2000. Neither of them are around.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So I guess that leads me to my next question. Could you see boxing going in a direction where it's DAZN, ESPN Plus, and broadcast television? Or
I think we're there. I think we're there already, Zain. The only one. Well, I wouldn't say we are there completely, because Top Rank still airs cards on linear ESPN. But who's not to say? And Zain, we talked about this, on our show. I talked about this with Nick Morganson on Empty the Bench Sports. Sorry, having a little echo in my headphones for a second. But what happens if ESPN decides, hey, screw the television, that the ESPN Plus, the streaming service that we know, becomes what ESPN is? Because I think that's a realistic thing that could happen, and that's scary.
Yeah, I mean, I could easily see it. You're now already seeing it with college football. You're seeing it with the NFL, where, they're saying, oh, there's multiple different ways to watch NFL games now via NFL Plus and stuff like that. I mean, yeah, that is where it's going. It is catering towards, my generation, so to speak. I mean, at least with my generation, me being a few years younger than you, we literally grown up on streaming. So I could easily see a direction to where it just only goes that way, which also leads me to say this, and I think I'm shouting it from the rooftops, but there needs to be something in the next 5 or 6 years where there is a bundle package to where when you purchase ESPN Plus, you get everything that ESPN Plus is being offered to you. I think it needs to go in that direction. It needs to be a la carte, because if it doesn't become a la carte and it still is the double paywall, I think you're going to turn a lot of people away, and you're only going to see people that would have bought every single fight only buy maybe 1 to 2 fights a year, and maybe even none. So, just because of how hard it is to be a combat sportsman at this point, which costs around the average consumer if you were to buy everything about $1,400.
But I fear, Zain, and I'm with you. I have championed on this network that Vince McMahon vision with the WWE network, now, headed by Endeavor, that they got it right with their, what happens right now with Peacock, how you get all the premium live events for, just the purchase of your subscription. But I'm worried considering what the Zone has done, what ESPN Plus has been doing with boxing, with the UFC. Is pay-per-view, because remember, like you said last week, the Zone was supposed to be the replacement for pay-per-view, and now it's just another paywall to the paywall, and I fear that's just the direction that we're going to go in, which, again, I've talked about reinventing the wheel on this show.
Mm-hmm. And as much as we keep talking about it, I don't think anything's going to change until more and more people keep voicing their concerns. I think the only way it's going to change is if one night a pay-per-view goes out for every single person in the world. No matter how you're watching it, the entire feed goes out, and that's when they're going to have to say, okay, we really need to I can make a change because we don't want to have this happen again.
All right, let's talk about a couple other things before we move on. Steven Espinoza to be let go. What do you see happens for him next? Do you see Dana White offering him a job?
No, that's definitely not going to happen. You could set that at plus 8,000 odds right now. I don't think Dana White and the Weasel will ever be friends.
I couldn't even get to the first word without laughing.
Yeah, I mean, you can't even talk about it without laughing either. But I will say I could see him joining either Golden Boy or a Matchroom with Eddie Hearn. And
I totally see that. Yeah,
doing business together with Eddie Hearn, which actually that would be a good power play to Bob Arum's Top Rank, and I think you might see a new rivalry brewing between the tag team of Espinoza and Hearn and Arum, and I think you could see a lot of interesting and really bad, frankly, negotiations for the next year to 2 years that you and I could just laugh our asses about every single week.
Probably. My only advice to Hearn then would be get off a platform like The Zone and tune it and put on something that Americans will actually watch.
Yeah, or maybe even make his own streaming platform.
The Matchroom Boxing platform. That's up to that.
Yeah, I would too.
All right, and then future of Bellator, and talks about all this because you mentioned Bellator 301, last MMA events on the channel, and quite frankly, as of right now, again, the last Bellator potentially seems like it's starting in 2024. We still have no idea. We don't know if Zelino's report is right. We don't know if Todd Atkins is right. At this point, San, it's kind of like what we said before. At this point, it's just until one of the parties officially says something. No clue.
Right. And who knows? Maybe it doesn't come out until I ask Scott Coker at the pre-fight press conference what the heck is going on with the whole thing.
Imagine if you do and he gives a response. That would be awesome.
That would be that would mean that everyone would have to give me the credit for breaking potentially news if he doesn't.
Good at the MMA Outsiders, damn it.
Yeah, that would be one of the wildest MMA media stories in the history of MMA Twitter. If we were the ones to get the official credit for that over everybody else. But nonetheless, definitely very weird times in the Showtime / Bellator realm. A lot of uncertainty on both sides, and quite frankly, it's taking away from what a stacked Bellator 301 event it should end up being. To remind everyone, I will be or on site covering it for bjpenn.com, which I'm very much looking forward to.
All right. In other news, Sam, Bellator has cut Dillon Danis.
Yeah, this is not surprising, and I remember Scott Coker saying, "quote when it came to Danis potentially making a return to Bellator, this was like a year ago. He goes, he's going to want to have to do it, and sure enough, what he did was make a clown out of himself in England, and of course, Bellator had no choice, but to release him. This is the right decision. I don't think you'll ever see Dillon Danis in MMA again. Now he's talking about, I want to get signed to the UFC. He does not deserve to be signed.
Dana,
anywhere.
don't you dare. Dana, don't you. I think it's more likely we see him in bare knuckle than UFC.
Oh, I think Dave Feldman would be all over the freak show aspect, and I think those are
would. He absolutely would.
I think those are fights people would actually pay to see, because people want to see him lose. So actually, I think it would be a great business investment for BKFC. And I don't know if you saw, but before we came on the air, BKFC is now in South Africa. So they're clearly making moves to expand. So this would be another one of their puzzle pieces, if you will.
Sure. Speaking of Danis, speaking of the Paul brothers. So last week, Sam, we had a report from Happy Punch talking about 1.3 million pay-per-view buys for Paul versus Danis. Well, Dave Meltzer, from, formerly of MMA Fighting, longtime head of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, is now officially putting out a dispute. And wow, this is a discrepancy. This is a dispute. So Meltzer, according to him, he says that the pay-per-view, he has 10,000 television buys. He notes that basically the ratio of TV to streaming buys is like 1-3. So for every one television buy, it would be 3 buys on a streaming platform. So that would be like an ESPN Plus or a DAZN. So basically, he's saying that it didn't even come close to 100,000 buys, let alone 1 million.
Yeah, and knowing how we felt about this fight, this is not a surprise. I mean, did you really think 1.3 million people paid for that? No,
absolutely not. So and considering Happy Punch and Dave Meltzer, I know Meltzer in the wrestling side of things has gotten a little questionable reputation. I'm going to side with Meltzer on this one, the experienced guy.
Yeah, Meltzer's been a veteran of the game and pay-per-view buys for years and years and years.
So here's my question then, Zain. Here's my question. Is this a matter of Dillon Danis being annoying, or is it a matter of, we talked about with Jake Paul. We'll talk about Jake Paul again. Are some of these numbers, the lower numbers, because people are, becoming immune, and or I don't know if that's the word, or numb to the fact that the Paul brothers are fighting. Like, it's not a spectacle as much anymore.
I think it's a mix of both. But I would say, if you were to ask me if it's one or the other, I think it's just people being immune, and there's other sports to watch. I mean, think about it. They put that fight on in the middle of the day in the United States when there's dozens of major college football games on. That's going to take precedent over a fight that doesn't even matter in the long run. And when you have Todd Grisham, who's one of the best commentators in the business, no disrespect to him at all, but when you have Todd Grisham hyping up every single fight, from the tag team fights to the main event, literally doing his own self-promotion of the fight, which of course he was probably told to do by his own executives, it's probably not a good sign.
Zain, you know what it is? It's a circus. Broncos country. Oh, I'm sorry. Danis country. Let's ride.
Yeah, that's a good one. You could slap something before a country, and I think people would be entertained. And it could be it could be anything. But yeah.
I'm very nervous. Breaking the fourth wall. I'm very nervous about the Broncos country. Let's ride for this week. I may have gone. I don't know if overboard is the word, but I definitely have made it known how Packers fans might feel after losing to Denver. But that's neither here or there. That's for Football Friday this week.
Of course, and not to drag that part on too much longer, but look who accurately predicted that Denver would cover the spread. I did.
Of course. All right. One other story before we get to our big preview. Speaking of Jake Paul. So there's no update about December 15th, but in a very interesting tweet, Most Valuable Promotions, Jake Paul's promoter, put out a tweet saying that Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz, they will rematch, but it will not be in boxing again. Insinuating that Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz is in progress to being signed for a fight in the Professional Fighters League cage, in the smart cage, rather.
Yeah, I would definitely be excited for this. Just tell me the date and venue, and I'm there. That's something I definitely want to see. As dumb as that fight may be, I mean, they've been talking about doing an MMA crossover forever. I think it would generate buzz like you've never seen before. If that was an MMA fight, that'll be on every sports show in America. If that fight ends up taking place, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna want to watch this. As much as it's a Paul brother, as much as I might feel it. This is one of those fights where I'd say, we've seen so many crossover boxing fights, a crossover MMA fight. I'm like, okay, my curiosity is a little piqued right now. Plus, Nate Diaz at a promotion that's not the UFC.
Yeah, very intriguing. Number one, and number two, it'll be interesting to see if the UFC tries to stop it in any sort of way.
That's exactly what I'm wondering.
Could you see that happening?
But the UFC putting like some injunction or something? Absolutely.
Oh yeah. I could see them going to ESPN executives and saying, "Yeah, you cannot air this, no matter what you try to do."
The problem is PFL is under the ESPN umbrella as well.
Right.
But so
you would probably assume, though, that the UFC has more power than the PFL when it comes to ESPN's priorities, though, right?
For sure. But obviously, ESPN officials are gonna want to put this up,
right?
So might be up the creek without a paddle, there, Dana.
You never know.
All right. Speaking of the PFL, Francis Ngannou. Let's talk about his fight this weekend. Facing in a non-title, I assume, exhibition, the WBC and lineal heavyweight champion of the world in Tyson Fury. So, Zain, are we still saying that Francis Ngannou fumbled the bag?
No. He's being paid the most money he'll ever be paid for a single fight, and it may not even a 7 minutes. And truly, as much as I hate to eat my words and go back to or go against what I said in January, I was wrong about everything I said in January. He made the right financial decision to take this fight, and now we're finally here. Now, the thing that bums me out though about this is they could have gone all out. They could have done a world tour. They could have been a press conference in 5 different cities. They didn't really do any of that. Do you think this fight's not getting the hype it should?
I think it should get a little more hype. I understand it's exhibition, but I think it should get a little more hype. But then, considering the fact that in over 200 of those countries, not the US, not the UK, not Canada, but in over 200 countries.
Not Ireland either.
Not Ireland, but the rest of the world. The platform that this fight is on is, of course, DAZN. Surprise, surprise. Of course, it's not going to get the promotion.
And of course, in all those other countries, it's on DAZN for free.
Well, you know what? I know we have to pay for it, but at least it's ESPN Plus. I can't believe I'm actually saying that. But I'd rather give my money to ESPN than I would DAZN.
It's really unbelievable when you think about it. And as much as you and I both want to see DAZN go away, I don't think it's going away anytime soon.
Well, it's basically, more of an international brand at this point.
Right. And they're airing all the NFL games in every country except for the United States. So
right. That's like the United States is the only place that it's just, hey, we're trying everything and we can't get a decent audience.
Right. Exactly.
All right, but let's talk about this fight.
I was just gonna say, in your lifetime, have you ever seen a boxing spectacle in the heavyweight division like we might see and Saturday, or is this a first for you in terms of this crazy crossover?
Obviously, it's not a first because obviously about 6 years ago already we had Floyd versus Conor, but you're talking about heavyweight, and yeah, this really would be a first for me. I mean, I know 13 years ago we had James Toney go over to the UFC to face Randy Couture, but that was James Toney, let's face it, being dumb or trying to get an easy payday or something, because Randy Couture just simply had his way with him.
Right, and that was James Toney way past his prime by at least 6 years. So
yeah. This is interesting because obviously we haven't seen Francis Ngannou in any sort of combat sports fight since he defended the UFC heavyweight title against Cyril Gane in January of 2022. But as you kind of said, he made his mark. He went out, left the UFC to try and make a mark, make a statement, and well, he's definitely making a statement here, taking on Tyson Fury. He's getting a payday. He's getting some decent attention. The PFL is treating him like a god with his contract. He went out and he definitely is doing something. Now, does that mean I think he has a shot? I have to be careful here. That is my PFL brethren, but it's going to be tough. Tyson Fury is the unbeaten heavyweight champion of the world, has held all 4 alphabet championships at one point or another. He's undefeated. Obviously he has the one draw with Deontay Wilder, yes, but nobody other than that fight with Wilder, the first one, nobody has tested him in a way that, we have been shocked. Francis, I mean, it's kind of curious because, again, this is boxing. This is not MMA. I mean, we saw with the Floyd-Conor fight, Sam, that Conor tied out a little easier, but it's not his own doing. It's that, with boxing, it's more rounds for shorter frames. It's more start, stop, start, stop. With MMA, it's up to 5-minute rounds. So you go for a little while, short break, go a while, short break. It's different pacing.
Yeah, it's different pacing for sure. And it's one of those things where, you don't know, is Tyson Fury underestimating Francis Ngannou because he has this Alexander Usyk fight waiting in the wings? Is Francis Ngannou going in there and thinking, oh, I'm just going to put on a good performance and, hype up the crowd and make the crowd happy? I think this is going to be one of those fights where Tyson Fury gets hit. I'm not going to say he's going to get knocked down, but I'm going to go out on the women's aid. I actually think this fight goes the full distance, and I think Francis will last the entire fight with Fury and gives him one of the biggest challenges that Fury's ever had. I mean, if you look at the way Francis Ngannou has been speaking to the media and the way he's been hyping himself up, he's taking this exhibition very, very seriously, and I would not put it past him to do something impressive. It's definitely not going to be a boring fight. It's going to be one of the most exciting exhibitions that people have ever seen, whether you like it or not.
For sure. So 10 rounds, 10 3-minute rounds is what this is scheduled for. So basically a non-title fight, even though Fury is a champion. Zain, I completely agree with you. I think Ngannou will hit Fury. Do I think he'll knock him down? No, but I think this will be fun. I think both will unleash power on one another. But I think, both guys are so tough that I agree with you. I think this one goes the full distance. Now, I'll give the win to Fury by decision, and I think he'll go in that same direction as well.
Yep. Now,
right.
What are we going to say if somehow, some way, Francis Ngannou does the unthinkable?
I was going to throw the grenade like I've been doing, but what if Francis Ngannou pulls this off? Here's what I think.
Not only what if Francis pulls this off, what if he literally puts him to sleep with one punch?
If I'm Alexander Usyk, then I'm turning to the IBF because we talked that story a little while ago, and I'm saying whoever your mandatory challenger is, let's go. I hate to say it, but if Ngannou knocks out Fury, the undisputed heavyweight title fight's dead.
I mean,
at least for now.
I mean, wait a second. Because it's an exhibition, they can still knock each other out, right?
I think so.
Yeah, that's pretty wild to think about. It's not going to count any either guy's record, yet they're treating it like a legitimate sparring match, essentially.
I don't think. Let me double check if Fury and Ngannou is an exhibition, but the fact that it said 3 10-minute rounds. Oh, the bout is not an exhibition. They will count this on a record.
Okay, so this is a real fight. Okay.
So Zain, I'll give you one better. I'll give you one better then. Do you think if somehow Francis puts Fury to sleep and Usyk turns around and faces the IBF mandatory, whose name slips my mind right now, could they pull Fury and Ngannou too and put the WBC title on the line?
Whatever Top Rank can do to make money, they will do. So I would say yes. And
I know that's not fair. And I know that's not fair to the other fighters. But Zain, as we say on this show,
boxing gets in its own way. And then watch how they'll make the rematch. They'll hype it up, and then the rematch gets canceled for some reason, and then they move it to not the middle of next year, but December of 2024, because of course they do, and we have to wait till 2025 for a potential third fight. I see the potential direction that this could go.
Yeah, of course we do. Of course we do. Nothing surprises us anymore. Zain, sometimes these things happen in boxing, and
these things happen in MMA. Sometimes these things happen.
Oh God, I have it on loop. I had it on loop.
It's only fitting though, is it not?
It's only fitting. It is only fitting that. It's only fitting we have a loop to end this show. I think we're done here, Zain. So thank you all out there for listening to another edition of the MMA Outsiders. Make sure to like button, subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube. Hit the notification bell. We're over 585 subscribers right now. We're closing in on 600. Please help us get there. Follow us across social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, at MMA Outsiders ETV. Follow the Empty Bench Podcast Network, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at ETV Network. Again, to my right is Zain Bando, my beloved co-host, staff writer, BJPen.com, MMA Knockout, Bellator Rankings Committee member for God knows how much longer. And then you can find his work. Follow him on social media at ZainBando99. I'm Tom Albano, contributor at Fansided MMA. Helping the PFL out, at least for the 2023 season, with their website for all the live events and such. So we got the two championship cards coming up. Can't wait for that. Follow me on social media at Thomas J. Albano. Make sure to take at the Empty the Bench Network and the MMA Outsiders on the road with you, so you don't have to see our ugly mugs. So find us on Acast and all audio-only platforms. If you are listening on those audio-only platforms, go over to our YouTube home, youtube.com/ETV Network. Give us our like and our subscribe there. Zain, I don't know what else you have to say, but all I have to say is beat Joe Piper and enjoy the spectacle that is Fury and Ngannou this weekend.
Yeah, enjoy the spectacle that is Fury and Ngannou this weekend, which leads me to my next question, Tom. Will you be recapping Fury versus Ngannou in any way?
The PFL has not asked me to yet. If they were to ask me, I probably wouldn't turn it down.
Will you be recapping it for Fansided?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, if you do, I definitely know. Knowing your writing style, you will have a very strong opinion on whatever comes out of that fight. I will probably do some sort of reactionary piece to it as well, either for Knockout or BJ Penn. So stay tuned for all of that and more. Again, Mike Thompson, BJ Piper. Enjoy the UFC this weekend if you want to talk about. If you want to put it that way, there's no UFC event this weekend. If you guys couldn't already tell us. Next weekend when we come back for episode 59, we will recap everything that was Fury versus Ngannou, and of course we will preview UFC Sao Paulo, which actually it ended up being one of the best fight night cards of the year, so we are looking forward to all of that and more. That has been the MMA Outsiders. This has been a production of the Empty the Bench Podcast Network, and we will see everyone right back here, same time, same place, next week, where it will be November.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.
Actually, no, Zain. It's not November. Our next show's on Halloween.
Oh, I meant the day that it'll air though, right?
No. Our next show, it airs. This is the 24th. Next week's the 31st. We're going to have a show on All Hallows Eve.
Oh, wow. We have stay tuned for a spooky special edition of the MMA Outsiders next week. We will see you. We will see you there, and then it'll be officially November after that.
Correct. See you, everyone. Ooh.
See ya.